Alright, Muscleheads, welcome to the 6th episode of the Super Musclecast, where we bid adieu to the Kaiju Extermination arc and say hello to the 20th Chojin Olympics. We're going to be talking about two interesting half-episodes on this podcast today. Episode 6A, Kinnikuman is super popular, otherwise translated as Kinnikuman is sexy, and 6B, I want to represent Japan. You know, we could have gone either way as to which season of the Super Musclecast we included this episode in. I thought that since some of our favorite bad guys from the Kaiju Extermination arc get together, not to spoil things and get too far ahead of ourselves, but since some of our favorite bad guys from the Kaiju Extermination arc get together in this episode to take on Kinnikuman, we would include this one at the end of our examination of the Kaiju Extermination arc. But speaking of bad guys who are back by popular acclaim, as always, I am joined by my co-host, the Punch King. Punch, how are you doing?
I am damn glad to be here, TG Moxley, and I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to digging into this one. I thought it was a really interesting choice for all the reasons that you talked about. Especially, it highlights to me, it's a weird thing. We're ending arcs in mid-episode. You know, it's like the usual Kinnikuman. Two-part episode, two stories, two good little discrete shows in kind of a way. And the thing is that we're, you know, almost completely closing up one season and opening up another. And I find that very interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about this as we get started, since you have this information or at least know where to get it, how in the spectrum of, well, I guess both the context of the manga, but also the anime's original airing run in Japan, how is this handled? Because this feels like we're switching seasons mid-episode here, which is interesting, but what was the perspective on this kind of live as it happened?
Well, in the manga, in fact, you don't get into the 20th Chojin Olympics until the start of the third volume. So you actually have two full volumes of kaiju extermination nonsense to worry about. And also the Roots Island arc, which is racist and nobody particularly enjoys talking about it because it's not part of the good arcs of Kinnikuman. So that one's not even adapted to the anime, so we kind of have an excuse to not really talk about it. But that's what ends the second volume of the Kinnikuman manga. And then you get the nice, you know, break between volumes, and the third volume starts fresh with the Chojin Olympics, whereas in this one we've got an episode that is heavily early Kinnikuman gag manga oriented, followed by an episode that really has more of the tone and style that you come to expect from the later tournament arc episode of Kinnikuman. So on one hand, it's a blessing in the anime that they just kind of get to it and don't spend episode after episode faffing about with Monster of the Week, two self-contained plots in one TV episode kind of format as they've been doing up until now, but it's still an abrupt change, and it's interesting that they make the change so abruptly, since we're not entirely done with the Kaiju Extermination arc. We're still going to get some of these early chapters of the manga from volumes 1 and 2 interspersed amongst our volume 3 Chojin Olympics stories.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. That is an interesting choice, and I guess I'll be looking forward to wherever this ride takes us. I sort of assumed the way that the episode had gone, which we'll get to, that maybe that had put a bow on it, but we're going to see, aren't we?
We certainly will. And, yeah, I don't really have a good transition, so scene 1 at the Kinniku house. Kinnikuman is reading the paper, and Meat asks him, you know, you see any good articles? And it turns out that superhero clubs are getting popular amongst university girls, which Kinnikuman makes a very lecherous face right after he says university girls. So, you see where his mind's at with this whole affair. And wouldn't you know it, there's no Kinnikuman University Girls fan club listed in the paper, but here's a knock at the door.
Yeah, there are a couple of university girls that are there to see him. The thing is that this is kind of a plausible situation because I know that, in the 80s among American university girls, there were a lot of these, like, weird fads that would come up. Like, I'm in a university town myself, for instance. And, I was, just a small child when this happened. But I know that there was, in the 80s, sort of a push that a lot of the young women at the university had just started changing their major to double major in not only ancient Egyptian history, but also in like trade school, and they were going for plumbing. So you had that just as an immense thing that took off among young women of this age, that they were both involved in the ancient American or ancient Egyptian history courses, and they were also involved in the plumbing courses. And that's because in the early to mid 80s, there were a lot of young women who wanted to be Farrah Fawcett majors. But in this case, it's the Kinnikuman fan club that we're seeing, and so we can kind of take this as being somewhat plausible, given that he's had some success in recent episodes.
Indeed. And now for a little bit of cultural context. I don't know too much about Japanese university culture. I know that if you look up sororities and fraternities in Japan, you find one strange German Catholic organization, rather than your traditional Greek letter organizations, so I don't think that those are in play here, but I do know that in Japanese universities you find both circles, which are groups of people who share a common interest and do activities based on that interest, and clubs, which are the same but more organized, taken more seriously, and done in a somewhat more formalized manner. So, Kinnikuman's fandom here is fitting into the circles within Japanese university. So look at him go. And the girls are here to invite him to a party. Isn't that great?
That is. It's a little weird when they fold up and throw away the poster, I think it was, that he gave them. I'm not sure. I think
it was like a poster-sized business card.
Yeah. So we'll go with poster, but they still wanted to have him around, so that's nice of him. It gratifies his ego, and he's going to get to go to this party and be super popular. Surely there's nothing shady about this or sketchy. This is good for him. He's finally having some success in the world.
He absolutely is, and he's just so chuffed with his circumstances that we find him in the next scene walking through the park, loudly singing his own closing theme song, the old 2 times 9 equals 18 rock and roll jingle. As you do.
As you do. I do that a couple times a week.
It's actually, having your own theme song is good, but if you have to borrow one, Kinnikuman's got a few good ones of his own that I like to use for morning alarms and so forth. We'll talk more about the music of Kinnikuman as time goes on. We're still in the early stages where we've got one opening theme song and one closing theme song and nothing to compare them to, but there's going to be hot competition for favorite Kinnikuman songs as time goes on.
For me, it's the Gyudon jingle. Always.
And, so Kinnikuman approaches a creepy old house and gets scared by a creepy old university girl, who kind of approaches him from behind, illuminating her face with a candle, and creeps him out before he realizes it's one of the girls from earlier.
I love the shading effects on her face in this scene.
And then we get one of this episode's untranslatable bits of humor as Kinnikuman says this villa is making him crave something sweet, vanilla, which I assume... Go ahead.
Is it a pun on villa and vanilla? Is that what... Okay, when you just said it like that, it finally clicked and dropped into place. Is that possibly what it is? I thought that there was some awesome Japanese pun that just was too layered for me to get. Is it really that they're just talking about villa and vanilla? Is that... Has it come to this?
I think it's come to that. I assume that whatever the joke was in the original Japanese is equally clumsy if it's not the exact same joke. This could be an occasion of a translator doing a closest approximation of the mechanics of the joke, wherein we're comparing the sound of a type of dwelling to the sound of a foodstuff that is sweet and coming up with a lame pun that way. But one way or another, this vanilla is making him crave a villa. So, unfortunately, he gets no vanilla, he gets villains, as in the next scene he goes in to meet his fan club and a cage drops from the ceiling onto him.
I'm glad that whoever was using the machine that dropped that cage knew how. Fortunately, nobody was hurt.
Absolutely, you wouldn't want to do that if you didn't know how.
Do not use unless you know how, absolutely.
Yeah, someone should make a sign. But, yeah, so then we see as the ghouls pull their masks off, I'm going to keep that in, as the ghouls pull their masks off, they are in fact Kinkotsuman, Erogenes, who was one of the monsters in space from episode 3, Abdodula Jr., Ditto, as well as being the scion of Abdodula, Okamaras, the enemy of the Kinnikuman pilot manga, as well as another one of the space monsters from episode 3. And then at the end, an actual university girl. Oh, no, wait, it's just Iwao and his mask was stuck. That's a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. Would have been funny if there had been one university girl who was just, on the villains team and kind of vibing with them. She's aligned with them, but, she's kind of her own thing. But no.
No. Meanwhile, Terryman has been gifted a new scramjet by an American fan and is outside of the Kinniku house picking up meat. And he and Natsuko are gonna go with Meat for a spin. Meat's been enjoying some time off from hanging out with the prince, doing his own thing, eating some Pocky, eating a sticky bun, eating all kinds of stuff, and watching TV. And now he's gonna go for a drive with friends. So far things are really going Meat's way.
What an enjoyable and wholesome evening for him. I'm happy for him.
Absolutely, but Kinnikuman isn't in such good condition, as he's tied up with a rope and surrounded by enemies, and they do a little baseball skit where Kinkotsuman is the coach of a baseball team and he assigns the various monsters to positions, and first up to beat up Kinnikuman is Erogenes, who his face is based on some Japanese actor who has a remarkably trapezoidal face, and there's not a whole lot more to say about that than that, but his method of beating up Kinnikuman is to stomp on his shadow.
I also noticed, and it's not quite the same as Abdodula, but he also has remarkably dark midnight blue skin and large pink lips.
Yeah, it's a weird look, especially considering that the only direct elements of caricature going on with him are to the actor Shofu Kute Nikaku. So it's a guy with a broad face, but they're rendering him with very dark skin and lips that look like night crawlers, and so it borders on racist caricature.
I didn't get it, but here we are. I wondered if it was that, but they're sort of not afraid to go more heavily into the racist caricature elements as we see with Abdodula. So. I don't know. It's another one of those weird Kinnikuman things.
It's another one of those weird Kinnikuman things, as is Okamaras, whose name, as we mentioned the last time, he or she or they, I've seen different renderings in different places, appeared. The name means basically homosexual attraction. Although in the Kinnikuman pilot that you can find translated into English, it consistently uses the pronoun she, so I'm not sure exactly what the deal is with this character, but she's a Kinniku fan.
I was wondering about that. I guess I'll clarify. I was wondering whether that the joke here was that there was a female bespeckled Barney the dinosaur that was sweet on Kinnikuman, or whether there was also homophobia in the mix.
The female Barney the dinosaur reading is certainly defensible, and unfortunately, so are the potentially homophobic readings. It's an interesting little visual detail that whenever this character talks directly to Kinnikuman, she is in front of a background of sparkling roses. So definitely, they're going all in on the romantic attraction this character has towards Kinnikuman, whatever else this character might happen to represent. And this actually, when I was reading the Kinnikuman pilot manga, this didn't come up, Okamaras was just a monster who showed up and got Kinniku beamed, and that was that.
Well, what can I say about that hasn't already been said? Not much. This is early 1980s Japan. We had some pretty regrettable and egregious stuff in early 1980s America. There's a lot of it that I wish that it wasn't, but it kind of is. So, with a moment of stern disapproval, I guess we'll move on and go through with the plot here.
Indeed, and the plot is that Kinnikuman in his cell has been rescued by one Okamaras, who declares that she has loved him since first sight, lets him go free, and briefly distracts guard Iwao for him. Kinnikuman runs and then pours oil down the hall onto his pursuers, Kinkotsuman, Iwao, Abdodula Jr., Eraginesu, and I think that's all of them, and zaps them with his...
Let me stop you.
Yeah.
Because it's Okamurasu that pours the oil.
Oh, yeah.
At one point, Okamurasu pours the oil, and Kinkotsuman even says, "Why did you have to do that at a time like this?" And then, this is the part where I thought that we had kind of wrapped this arc up, because Kinnikuman does then turn around and perform the Kinniku Flash on them, setting the oil on fire with all of them except for Okamurasu in it. And with it being a cartoon, there's always room for this sort of thing. But your first assumption is, okay, well, they've all just burned to death then, so they're dead. So we've kind of wrapped this arc up. And as we were going into the Chojin Olympics, that was kind of my thinking. Like, okay, well, he's just killed them all. So I guess we're done with that, aren't we?
It is a pretty
not.
decisive victory, but not the final victory over Kinkotsuman and his minions, although I don't know that Eraginesu comes back at any point, and Abdodula Jr. maybe not. Definitely maybe.
So they might actually be dead.
They might actually be dead. They don't, but they were in the same fire as Kinkotsuman and Iwao, and those two certainly aren't dead, so I wouldn't bet on it.
Well then.
Well then, indeed. And in the final scene of the episode, we are outside of the creepy house where Terryman and the rest pull up in their car. Kinnikuman...
He's doing a fantastic job of selling his injuries here, I thought. I admired that.
Indeed. Kinnikuman comes out and he's all burnt up and looking gross. He declares, echoing Okamaras's words earlier while everyone was on fire, love is a battlefield. He declares, life is a battlefield. And if you, like me, were wondering what the heck, I looked it up, and just in case, we were hopeful that it was an actual Pat Benatar reference in the original, this cartoon is 1983. Pat Benatar's Love is a Battlefield won't be out as a single until the end of the year. So I'm assuming that it's probably an equivalent lyric in an equivalent Japanese song of the era that Okamaras quotes and Kinnikuman misquotes, and Pat Benatar is some kind of closest equivalent, or maybe I'm just reading too much into everything and it's just a saying.
Well, either way, strong conclusion to the episode, strong conclusion to the arc, and yeah, I really thought that he had just murdered most of his opponents here. So, we'll move on anyway.
We will move on anyway, and with the way Terry Man goes around shooting on people, you wouldn't be surprised if some people were run out of the territory via murder.
No indeed, but he's got a pretty sweet ride to show for it, so he's got that going for him, which is nice.
If you're burdened to death, I recommend heading down to our sponsor, Dairy Queen, and getting yourself a Orange Julius or a Dilly Bar or a Blizzard or one of those things. Chaz, the manager at the local Dairy Queen, told me he's been having trouble with some skeletons hanging around the dumpster at the back, spooking the employees. And he told me that if I came out and helped him fight some skeletons and at the end of the day returned with 5 leg bones, he would give me half price off an ice cream cake. Now, I don't mean to lord my intelligence over Chaz here, but if you're proficient at math, you'll quickly realize that you don't need to fight 5 skeletons to come away with 5 leg bones. You just need to fight one guy with 5 legs, beat him, and then you're done. So that's the update on how we're doing with our sponsor, Dairy Queen. We're happy with them, and they're happy with the work we're doing.
Well, it's especially this time of the year. This past week, it has been about 95 degrees Fahrenheit around here as a high. For those of you that use real temperatures and not made-up American numbers, that would be about 35 to 40 Celsius, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong there. So now more than ever, we need cool drinks and we need cool, delicious soft serve. Very accommodating people at Dairy Queen. I went in there in a Darth Vader outfit at one point and went in to make an order, for a cheeseburger, and the deal was a cheeseburger, a small order of fries, and a small drink for $4.99. And I told them I was going to have the cheeseburger, the small order of fries, and the medium drink for $4.99. They said that was not the deal, and I just looked at them in full regalia, and I told them, I'm altering the deal. Pray that I don't alter it any further.
Very good, sir. Very good. Always love that customer service at Dairy Queen. Well, another place you get great customer service is over at musclebusting.com, where you can mail at any time. Mail at musclebusting.com to get your questions, comments, or concerns here on the mailbag. I'm just gonna...
It is?
Yeah, indeed. I'm just gonna lift up this mailbag right here. I don't know. It's kind of... Sounds like it's full of quarters, man. That's a little bit weird.
Oh, you got the quarters I mailed you. Great.
Oh, yeah. All right. We can finally go to the arcade. That's sweet. And then, in addition to that, we've got a letter from Will Coldback saying, hey.
Oh, this guy again.
Yeah, I know. And what he has to say this week is...
Okay, well, he didn't have much to say then, so okay, we can move on, right?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of illegible scrawls. I'm sorry, everybody. Will Coldback from North Bay, Ontario, everybody. He's not a good guy. He's not all right. Well, that was everything in the mailbag, so let's move on to 6B. I want to represent Japan.
Do you now?
I do, and so does Kinnikuman. Well... he eventually does. He comes around to it. But before he comes around to it, a meteor comes around to him, and he and Meat are briefly afraid that the great catfish has caused an earthquake and are going to cause the house to fall down around their ears. And
all right. Well, it is not in fact the great catfish. It is Kinnikuman's pubes for a bearded dad.
And he is here to let Kinnikuman... Well, first he gets chewed out by Kinnikuman, who, in yet another possible reference or just cultural touchstone that doesn't quite work for you and I think he's doing some kind of kabuki play where he has dressed up in traditional garb with a bit of face paint. and he's doing a very old-timey, elevated, but old-fashioned thee and thou. Father, thou hast abandoned me and cast me out. How dare thou show thy face? Blah, 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 sort of thing. And Mayumi just sort of grabs him and gets him to knock it off. Which, yeah.
Like Frog from Chrono Trigger, or Cyan from Final Fantasy VI.
Like those excellent characters from literature and film, absolutely. And so Kinnikuman's dad is here to invite him to a dinner at Hotel Yoshinoya, where they discuss his future. Yoshinoya, of course, is the popular gyudon chain in Japan, and the hotel has one of those revolving... It's not a real hotel, it's a cartoon hotel, and it has a giant bowl of gyudon on top as one of those revolving restaurant gimmicks. So there's a little bit of irony.
The hotel what now?
Hotel Yoshinoya.
Living it up at the Hotel Yoshinoya. Oh, cut that. That was terrible.
No, I think I will leave that one in.
Oh my goodness, what have I done?
What have you done? And Kinnikuman's dad asks him, do you have to order gyudon at a high-class place like this? But I'd say that really, you know, this is
the answer
when
is
in
probably.
Rome. Yeah. When in Rome and a Roman, probably you should eat garum. Or gyudon.
Or gyudon. Yeah, there we go. Great minds think alike, and so do we.
Oh, geez, my cat's all over my notes again. Luckily, it's the good cat, not the bad cat, so this shouldn't end in a fight. So
Take your
Kinnikuman...
time. Meter's running.
So Kinnikuman's dad lets Kinnikuman know that he wants him to be the Japanese representative in this year's Chojin Olympics. And Adoran's Nakano is here to explain the Chojin Olympics, where every year all of the best Chojin get together and fight it out to decide who's going to be number one. What do you think of the Olympics as a basis for a wrestling tournament? This idea of each nation getting... It's a little bit Street Fighter-esque. There's a kind of World Warriors sort of every country sending a fighter who represents them and their styles or way of life in some sort of way.
I'm not sure that I get it, to be perfectly honest, because it is the Interplanetary Olympics, right?
Well, they're all Earth-based, even though the competition is being organized by the Committee on Planet Olympics, which is a planet composed of the Olympic rings. Technically, all of the Chojin have some sort of Earth-based location that they represent and have lived in. I think if you're like an entirely... that doesn't really explain how Mayumi was able to compete and be the 10th champion if he's just a space alien, but presumably he was somehow able to compete for Japan under the Ultraman clause that you can be a space alien and come from an alien planet so long as you reside within a human host for a certain number of days per year.
That's kind of the thing that had me thinking, because... Kinnikuman is a relatively recent immigrant to Japan, and it got me thinking, okay, is he a citizen? Does, he have immigration papers? Really, you could ask the same thing about Ultraman. I think that my understanding of the canon is that Terryman is actually just an American, so that tracks. When we find out, although, that Terryman is the representative from the southern U.S., it makes me wonder how they're dividing this Olympics up regionally as well. There's a lot... Yeah, there's a lot of just weird funkiness going on with people that qualify and everything. And the next thing, I'm half expecting that we are going to see that one of the countries has, entered a dog or something. And by the time that you're going through old case law to look up the people of Fernfield, Washington versus Airbud in 1993, I guess that's 10 years later, so that wouldn't apply. Never mind.
I mean, maybe that could have been decided on a precedent set in the 20th Chojin Olympics. We don't know yet. I mean, I know, but you don't know yet.
We're about to find out.
We are about to find out specifically that question. Can a dog represent the northern United States? Well, let me tell you, the northern United States do get a bit of a dog as a representative, but that's for a later episode. I'm not sure the U.S. and we can talk about this later is the only country that gets multiple representatives in the Chojin Olympics, a North and a South. So I'm not sure that what that tells you about the universe Kinnikuman is set in.
Oh no. Does that mean that the American Civil War did end up with the nation separating into two halves?
Harry Turtledove presents Kinnikuman.
How grim.
The Gyudons of the South.
Oh my goodness. Good night, everybody. It's been great. I've been your host, the Punch King, or your co-host, the Punch King, alongside TG Moxley. It's been great having you here. This has been a wonderful, wonderful podcast, but I've got to go.
But it's over now.
It is. Good night.
And we forgot to tell him that the only reason that Kinnikuman was even the entrant for Japan this year is because Ultraman got beaten up so bad by last year's champion Robin Mask, whom some have speculated may bear a small resemblance to one Billy Robinson, although, aside from having a association with Vern Gagne as time goes on, I'm not sure exactly what the justification for that comparison is. But anyway, we mentioned Ultraman, and I will say that Ultraman, from what I understand, he gets a pass as a Japanese citizen on account of he's a space alien, but his aircraft crashes with a Japanese scientific aircraft, and he fuses with the Japanese national inside that aircraft, and they become essentially the same person who gets giant as the occasion warrants. So, he's getting in on some kind of friends and family discount, is what I'm telling you.
Yeah, but for the purposes of this, he had gotten beaten up by Robin Mask last year and then retired. And I can commiserate because that's entirely how I feel about that Gyudon comment earlier. But we're going to press on. Unfortunately, I cannot follow the Ultraman precedent. We've got a lot more to cover here, so let's get on with it, where Kinnikuman's dad, if I'm not mistaken, is going to try to intervene with the Space Olympic Committee.
Yes, indeed. On Planet Olympics, Kinnikuman's dad has intervened, and he's put the chairman in a figure-4 leg lock. It's a brief visual gag where at first it looks like the chairman is in intense deliberation over whether to allow Japan to have an entry into the Chojin Olympics this year at all. But it turns out he's just being leg-locked, and once he is out of the leg lock, his mind is set, and he has no real interest in allowing Kinnikuman to compete this year, thinking that it would be a waste of time. They're hanging out in a big old room that has a giant Kamen Rider and I think it's some kind of Ultraman and some maybe other kind of a whole lot of tokusatsu references going on in the background. So there's still an element of Ultraman happening within the whole world of Kinnikuman. I should also point out, in fact, that Kinnikuman's rivalry with Ultraman goes back to the very pilot of Kinnikuman, where he is, in fact, initially represented, and this is non-canonical, but in the pilot manga, Kinnikuman is one of the Ultra siblings and grows up on planet Ultra with Ultraman and all of the other Ultras, and they bully him, and he's a really bad fighter and not good at anything, and they do things like break stuff and blame it on him, and he has a bad childhood, and he goes to Earth and wants to be a hero and gain respect, but he loses his first 54 fights in a row until finally encountering Okamaras and winning that fight and accumulating a lifetime record of 1-54. This is significant because Meat mentions in the very first episode of Kinnikuman that Kinnikuman's fighting record since he came to planet Earth has been pathetic. And, I can't read those those little results sheets that he was holding up with the X's and the O's and all of that Japanese wrestling does. And I assume that they got it from sumo, but that Japanese wrestling does to indicate wins and losses and so forth. But we know from the manga pilot that he had 54 losses in the time preceding Meat coming to Earth, and so that means that if we add up his fights in the meantime, a win over Goriki. We don't know if he beats Sheik Seijin or not, so we got to leave that one off. He clearly loses against Nessie. Getting eaten and pooped out by your opponent is an absolute loss. The space monsters don't count because they never show up to fight him. The aliens I don't think count because he just plays Space Invaders and they wander away. But he does beat Iwao, he does beat Kinkotsuman, and he does beat Gorazaimon, in addition to his initial victory over Okamuras. And so what does that put him up to?
Well, he's starting to get some momentum, but it's not very hard to see why they might not want him representing Japan in the Olympics here. But, they're going to try to work it out. You mentioned the negotiation strategy earlier. I don't know if it's better to put the chairman in a figure four leg lock than it is to hit four men with a chair. But I do know that by the end of this scene, they have agreed to let him test himself against the preceding year's champion, Robin Mask. You mentioned the Billy Robinson connection. I'm stuck on the fact that this dude's wearing a night helmet.
And you know what? It is a 100% functional night helmet, and I guess he's wearing it under some kind of Bob Orton Jr.'s cast or some other kind of rule that allows you to wear heavy, dangerous objects in the ring. Because
he's wearing a night helmet.
He's wearing a night helmet, and it functions to protect his head from blows. So the fact that he's allowed to get away with it, I think, is shows that he's smarter than the average bear. And so he's going to test Kinnikuman with his win-loss record of 5-55 by our reckoning. Although, 5 of the last 6 matches in that record are wins, so that's not so bad. So it's like a TNM7 with the streak factor turned up to maximum when calculating your standings. He's jumped ahead of everyone on the basis of having a few recent wins over easy opponents, and now he gets to test himself against last year's champion to see if he's truly worthy of the task.
You are correct.
I am absolutely correct. And so they are in Tokyo. Mayumi returns to Earth with the good news, and they are looking for Kinnikuman. Where's Kinnikuman? Well, he got sad and hid.
In the subway, in giant form for some reason.
In the subway in giant form, which, really wasn't a great plan, but was kind of necessary to set up what comes later. And so here comes Robin Mask, and honestly, Mayumi is so disappointed to see his son's head sticking out of a subway tunnel that he says, you've lost all hope of representing Japan. But Kinnikuman fires up with his fighting spirit and takes on Robin Mask, and soon finds himself locked in Robin Mask's mighty bow and arrow submission, and I just got the Robin Hood bow and arrow connection. Good Lord. It's only been a few years.
You're not alone there.
Well, you have the excuse of not having rewatched this episode many times over the past few years. But yes, Robin Mask, Robin Hood, bow and arrow submission. It's a very dangerous hold where you grab the chin and legs and pull back to stretch the back of the opponent, as Adoran's Nakano explains. And Kinnikuman is... How dreadful. And Kinnikuman is locked in it, and he won't give up, and he's showing that fighting spirit, and he lasts until Robin Mask's arms go numb, and Robin Mask drops him, and they both shrink down to small form.
That is indeed what happens, but not all is as it appears. Kinnikuman was using a performance-enhancing device, as we will find out soon.
Indeed, Yosaku-san, who today is working as some kind of subway construction worker, comes looking for his metal beam and finds it wedged down the back of Kinnikuman's tights, which of course straightened his spine and allowed it not to be bent by the mighty bow and arrow submission.
Well, how about that? So he is going to be representing Japan in the Chojin Olympics then. Um, but he probably shouldn't be. It sort of follows along with an arc where maybe Kinnikuman is a little bit more competent and formidable than he was at the start of the kaiju extermination plotline, but uh, he might not be quite to the level where he can accomplish this without a lot of luck and cheating, as we saw here today.
Indeed. And one interesting change from the manga is, in fact, in the manga, Robin Mask simply doesn't use his full power against Kinnikuman. There is no implication that Kinnikuman cheated or got lucky or anything like that to get out of it. He was simply facing an opponent not operating at his full potential. And so, my question to you, Punch, is as far as the psychology of what gets Kinnikuman into the tournament in the first place, do you prefer the lucky medal in the pants, or do you prefer the opponent who went a little bit easy on him but still was able to test his fighting spirit?
Well, I would determine that based on factors that we don't know. Mostly Robin Mask's motivations for doing that or not doing that. I guess as we're reviewing the anime and not the manga, we're playing in the realm that we've been given, and um, we have to accept that Robin Mask was being serious and that it was just Kinnikuman cheating to get in.
Indeed, indeed, and I think that maybe makes a little bit of a better story arc, just in terms of we know that this guy has. He didn't know that he was cheating at the time he was cheating. He thought that he was fighting with all his might, and he was willing to have his back broken out of pride rather than giving up to the bow and arrow submission. So he still showed something, but there's also this strong implication that he has accidentally ended up in the position he's in rather than gotten into the Chojin Olympics through merit. And I think that makes him a bigger underdog, not to return to our Air Bud conversation from earlier. Maybe he is the Air Bud of the Chojin Olympics. There's no rule saying that a dog with a metal beam shoved down its pants can't. Well, maybe there is a rule against that one in particular.
Well, we'll have to talk to our lawyers.
We'd better. And now, speaking of lawyers, I am contractually obligated to give the listeners a update and let them know that I have indeed made gyudon, and it was, in fact, fast, delicious, and cheap, too. Oh, you know what? I just realized that with this email here, you can hear it. That's an email right here in my hand. With this email from Will Coldback, I was reading the wrong side of the page. The writing's on the other side of the page. And it says, "Hey, did you finally make that bowl of gyudon? Why is it taking you so long to make it if it is indeed fast?" Well, it turns out that gyudon is quick, but I'm sudden. And one day I just had the sudden urge to go out to the butcher shop and get myself... See, where I'm from, meat doesn't have logical names. Like you're probably used to your sirloins and your T-bones and your flank steaks and so forth. But up here, everything is an inside, outside, top and bottom, round, circle, flat grilling, frying, inside, outside, inverted steak, pump handle, 450... it's a bunch of words that don't make sense. So it took me a while to find a cut of beef that I was happy with, aka the cheapest cut of beef that ever there was. And I sliced that up really nice and thin with my Japanese knives, which, that's where I sublimate my desire to own katanas. I don't really have the wall space for a katana wall, so I do have the space in my knife block for some nice Japanese chef's knives. So I put my urge for some fine Hanzo Hattori steel into that, and it yielded some nice thin slices of beef. I didn't use nearly enough of the gyudon sauce. I think I overestimated how concentrated the pre-made broth was, and needed to use a little bit more of that, but it was good, and next time I will take better pictures and post them on the Twitter. So that that plot line of the podcast has thankfully resolved and no laughs were had.
Well, at least it was delicious, right?
Absolutely. And it was also fast and cheap.
Well, I hope you didn't sell the cow popping out of the bowl to bonk you with the mallet.
No, indeed. Although that's a nice little animation, and I'm gonna try to make little gifs of it whenever it occurs outside of. Because every once in a while, like in the last episode, when they do the Gyudon jingle and the little dance and the little cow that pops out of his bowl and bonks him on the head with a mallet, they actually had that happen in the park where Gorazaimon and Hitoshi and Psycho and Kinnikuman had their little King Kong tribute act, and, you know, it wasn't just against the generic Gyudon background. So I'm going to try to find all of the instances of him doing the dance outside of the Gyudon background and maybe post those in a Twitter thread.
Well, I look forward to it heartily. I also look forward to the next episode of the Musclecast, and in the context of that, the next episode of Kinnikuman, where we're going to continue the Chojin Olympics arc. But we've come to the end of this one for today, so TG Moxley, why don't you take us home?
Alrighty then. Next time on the Super Musclecast, the Chojin Olympics are going to get rolling in earnest, and we're going to take ourselves a brief break before we get to that. You know, a little bit of well-deserved time off, although by the time you're listening to this, we will surely be deep into production on the next season. And so until then, I bid you adieu and a rock on, goddammit, I'm TG Moxley. Rock on, Punch King.
Rock on, Punch King. I'm TG Moxley, saying so long, and join us for Season 2 of the Super Musclecast.
はちゃめちゃ忙しいスーパーヒーロー
筋肉肉肉肉18
お肉の手入れサインの練習
筋肉肉肉肉らしいわ
空手チョップで箸を